All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of the Next Man Up Sports Podcast. I'm your co-host, Bannon Crowley, and we have my other co-host, Colin Martin here.
How's it going?
And we got a lot to talk about. We had a big weekend in sports and last week. So we're going to start this off talking about the NFL Combine that happened last week. We can go through this quickly. We have a new mock draft. So if you have any initial thoughts about this overall, we saw a lot of guys run. We saw a lot of guys not compete too, which was kind of interesting for some guys. If you have any thoughts right away.
Yeah, I think overall, this combine, not that it was uneventful, we didn't see a major shift, or else we haven't yet. Like, there wasn't a guy like John Ross, for example, that came out and blazed the 40 time, and we already see him moving up draft boards. Or we didn't see anybody bench, a crazy amount that has, defensive coaches drooling or anything. Not to say that nothing happened, and we'll get into that, but overall, I don't think there was a crazy shift like some people may have been waiting for. So, I mean, with that being said, we have down here like winners and losers. Who are some guys that you think made the most of their combine, or some guys that really took a hit from it?
I think one guy right away that I can think of is Nolan Smith. He's been really high on my board. He's been one of my favorite players, probably my favorite player at Georgia the past few years. And I think with him having a really good combine too, that kind of pushes back all the concerns about his injury and everything. So I think now he should definitely be looked at kind of in that top position wise for him, at least, just because I think he's definitely one of the best players at his position and in the draft overall. So I think he had a good combine. Also, Joey Porter did good too. There are some good receivers that we talked about. There are some lower guys that ran faster that might move up to maybe like a day 2 or day 3 guy, even if they were undrafted. There weren't very many losers, in my opinion. Jalen Carter not being there, obviously, with everything going on, but that doesn't really affect it too much. If he doesn't end up in any trouble at all, I don't think his draft stock might fall from like the 3rd pick to the 4th pick. Like, he's not going outside the top 5 unless he gets locked up. So if you have any immediate winners or losers too.
Yeah, I had 2 of each. For the winners, one guy that I was really expecting, and I'm very happy he was the winner, is Christian Gonzalez. I think it was also a big deal because Devin Witherspoon didn't participate in the combine, so that's immediately going to set him back. But with that being said, Gonzalez came out at 6'1", which, I mean, he's not the tallest corner ever, but we see a trend of short corners this year, so that sets him apart a little bit. Ran a 4.38 in the 40 and had a really good vert. 41.5 is what I have down. I mean, a good combine like that sets him apart, in my opinion, from other corners. That's something we'll discuss in the future, but he's my guy. And then Jack Campbell, I'm a big middle linebacker guy. He's 6'5". He ran the 3rd best in the 3 cone, which I think is important for middle linebackers. And he ran a pretty good 40. I mean, guys like that sometimes project weird in the draft. We'll see middle linebackers go top 10, and then we'll see drafts where they don't go until mid-second rounds. And a guy like Jack Campbell doing well really separates him from the pack. I think that's the big thing in the combine. It's not prove you're good, because we already know these guys. It's separating from the pack. Then some losers. I have Kayshon Boutte. I think he was in store for a really good combine. He came out and just kind of blew it. His 40 was 4.5, which, let's not pretend 4.5 is bad, but he really could have used a fast one, considering he didn't even measure in at 6 foot. He only came in at 5'11". And then Andre Carter out of Army. The biggest problem with him is he didn't run the 40, and I think that's where he would have impressed. He's an edge rusher with sneaky speed for his size. And that was shown when we went to the strength workouts, which he did compete in, and he benched the least out of any edge rusher. I think he was going to wow scouts with his speed, and for whatever reason, maybe injury-wise, maybe just a personal thing, he didn't run the 40, so there was nowhere to be impressed with his speed. So, I mean, overall from the combine, I think we saw a lot more winners than losers, like you alluded to, but I mean, Andre Carter and Boutte are some guys that are probably going to take some pretty big hits from this.
Yeah. Another guy who's probably going to take a big hit, Andrew Voorhees tearing his ACL. Obviously, we kind of have to have him in the loser section. Not his fault, but obviously this will impact a little bit. He was going to be, I would say, probably like around a day 2 guy. I don't know.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. But now we'll see what happens. I think he'll definitely get drafted, but he'll definitely move down a little bit.
I mean, he tore his ACL, so that's probably going to hinder him for the whole year. But I mean, as you alluded to, me personally, definite day two guy for me before this. He's one of the best interior linemen in a class that doesn't have a lot of good interior linemen. So I mean, he'll still be drafted. He's worth a pick, but he's probably a late D3 guy at this point.
All right. With all that combine talk in mind, we're going to go into our second mock draft that we have now to start March. We'll probably have another one to end the month. And then after that, I mean, next month we have the draft coming up. So we'll have a lot of draft content. So to start overall, I think we both have two trades in this. So nothing too crazy. But to start, I'll go with my number one overall pick. I have the Colts still trading up and taking Bryce Young in my draft.
Yeah, I mean, keep it simple. I have the Texans still trading up and drafting Bryce Young number one.
Number two, I have the Texans staying there and taking CJ Stroud.
Yep. Number two, the Bears are down here now, and I think they take Will Anderson Jr.
Number three, I have the Cardinals taking Will Anderson Jr. I could see them taking Jalen Carter, but I think with the question marks right now, I kind of just have them taking him.
Yeah, I actually have three trades in this, only two early. There's one late in the first round. So for my second trade, I have the Panthers moving up with the Cardinals. I think they're going to go all out at quarterback, and I don't expect them to get a good free agent. So I think they trade up and take Will Levis.
Interesting. Number three for Will.
I know. That's again. This is
in the top three.
Yes, top four because I have the Bears at number two. But I mean, for me, at least how I looked at this is a projection, not necessarily what I would do. Not a big Will Levis guy, but I think the Panthers are.
So you think essentially you don't have him as QB2 in the class, but you think he'll go second?
I do not. He is my QB4 personally. We're going to have positional big boards up in a little bit on the Instagram, and maybe we'll talk about it. But I mean, I just think there's going to be teams that take him really high. And one thing I want to say about him before moving on, because we're going to talk about him a lot as the draft comes up, I don't necessarily think he's as much of a project as people make it seem. I think he is developed. I think he just hasn't played in a good offense yet. So I'm not a fan of him. I don't necessarily think he's going to be that guy. But to be fair, I think he should be given a chance in an offense to succeed. And I think he could. I don't think he's horrible.
Yeah. I mean, going over there with Laviska Shenault, we're both big Laviska Shenault guys.
Yeah.
I agree with that. I don't think he's much of a project. I think he kind of already developed and he's just incomplete.
Yeah, I agree.
So four, I have the Bears who traded down, taking Jalen Carter.
Yeah, at four, the Colts are still here and they get their guy, CJ Stroud.
And then at five, this is kind of becoming like a lock for me at this point. I think the Seahawks are taking Tyree Wilson here.
Yeah, I think that's a great fit. But for me, Jalen Carter's still on my board somehow. I think the Seahawks take him.
And then at six, this one also kind of becoming a lock for me, Christian Gonzalez to the Lions.
Love the pick. Christian Gonzalez is my guy in this draft. I have him in the same spot.
And then at seven, this is where I see the Raiders, who just lost their quarterback, taking Anthony Richardson.
Beautiful. I think we're on the same page so far. Number seven, I have the Raiders taking Anthony Richardson.
And then at eight, I have the Falcons taking Lucas Van Ness like I did in the last draft.
Yeah, and I think they should attack edge rusher 100%. Tyree Wilson's still on my board. You got to take him at eight. I think I have the Falcons taking him at eight.
And then at nine, I have the Panthers taking Will Levis. The same as yours, but they don't have to trade up in mind to get him.
Yeah, and that would be best case scenario. So in mind, the Panthers trade up. We have the Cardinals here. I think you get your J.J. Watt replacement almost perfectly with Lucas Van Ness at 9.
Number 10, too, we're talking about locking in picks. I think the Eagles are now, in my mind, locked in with Joey Porter at 10.
Yeah, and that's a great pick. And that's, since I made this mock draft even yesterday, that's something I've really considered. I'm going with Devin Witherspoon here, but I think that's a great idea with Joey Porter moving off the board.
And then at 11, I had the Titans going back and forth between Quentin Johnson and Paris Johnson Jr., but I think they kind of just need a tackle a little more. So I'm going to take Paris Johnson, who's my number one tackle in this class.
Yeah, my tackle rankings have moved around a lot, but Taylor Lewan's gone. I think Paris Johnson Jr. fills in a perfect way. I have the same pick.
And then at 12, I don't think the Texans can pass up on Quentin Johnson here to pair up with their new quarterback.
Yeah, I'm getting nervous with the wide receiver projections. I think a lot of teams have all of them in varying different places. And I'm starting to hear some bad talk about Quentin Johnston. But I think once we get to the TCU Pro Day, we're going to see him ball out and move him back up. And I have him in the same spot here. I agree.
And then at 13, I have the Jets taking Peter Skoronski. They definitely need tackle help, so that'll help them a lot.
Yeah, I mean, for all the same reasons, I have them taking Broderick Jones here. It's really just a preference thing. To me, they're 2A and 2B on my board. So I think you can go either way.
Speaking of Broderick Jones, I have the Patriots taking him at 14. I know
I
you'll
would
like.
not I would not be mad. That's a good pick. At 14, I have the Patriots taking Jordan Addison. I think it's just a scheme fit thing for me, and I'm a huge fan of, I'm a Patriots fan. I really like Jordan Addison's game. So maybe I put a little bias into this one, but it's a reach by a lot of people's standards. So who knows?
Yeah, we'll talk about this a little later because I have a pick that might be considered a reach, but I think offensive linemen, if you have a guy that's going to be there for 10 or 15 years and is really good, I never think offensive line is a reach, especially if he's good. Because overall on big boards, they're always going to be lower than position players, but I think it's always worth it.
Yeah.
And then at 15, I have the Packers taking Jordan Addison, which is kind of a surprise. They never take receivers, but it looks like Jordan Love's going to be the starting quarterback. So I think they need to get him a weapon.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. 15, I have a guy that's moved down mock drafts way too much, in my opinion. I still think he's a great player. I have Miles Murphy. I think, Rashawn Gary, you don't know the future with him. But if you want to put a guy on the other side of him right now, I think Miles Murphy is the perfect option.
So the guy that I was alluding to, a little bit of a reach here, but I think Washington's in a good spot to take him. Osiris Torrance here.
Yeah, I love my interior O lineman. I have a guy that's been moving up my draft board a lot. I think he profiles well with Washington. I have Deontay Banks out of Maryland.
I like that pick.
Yeah.
Staying on the cornerback pick, I have the Steelers taking Devon Witherspoon here. Before I had them going for Joey Porter, but I think he's jumped Witherspoon in my rankings at least. So I think they're going to take Witherspoon here.
Yeah, at 17, I have the Steelers making one of my favorite picks. My cornerback, too, as of now, Joey Porter Jr. I think he's a perfect fit with the Steelers, keep him in Pennsylvania, even though we're on opposite sides. I think if we're being realistic, by the time we get to the draft, Joey Porter is going to go before 17. But in my mock draft right here, he's still on the board. Perfect pick.
Yeah, I think the Steelers are kind of in a spot where if Joey Porter falls, I definitely see them taking him. And also Jordan Addison, if he can get to that spot too. But at this point, I think we just got to see what happens with those two guys because they could either fall or not fall.
Yeah.
At 18, I have the Lions taking Nolan Smith. I think this is perfect for that defense. And I think Dan Campbell will love Nolan Smith.
Yeah, I think that's a great pick. At 18, I have my overall biggest riser of this whole process. I have Kalijah Cansey. He's one of those dudes I didn't mention that had an amazing combine. I think he's a big interior guy. You know how Dan Campbell loves to build the trenches. I think Kalijah Cansey is your guy.
At 19, I have the Bucks taking the best tight end in this class, Dalton Kincaid.
At 19, I have the Bucks taking the best tight end in this class, Dalton Kincaid.
At least we can agree on that.
Yes.
At 20, I have the Seahawks taking Brian Bresee. They kind of, I guess they missed out on all the quarterbacks at this point. But also, I think with Geno Smith staying there, even if someone fell, I don't see them taking him. And I think Richardson, I had him going there last draft, but I think he's kind of locked himself into like a top pick at this point from everything that we've seen.
Yeah. At 20 for the Seahawks, I went on the other side of the trenches. I have Osiris Torrance. Their O-line's really not that bad, but they could really use just one more guard to fill in the spot. I think he's a really good prospect, so I think they'd be happy to get him at 20.
At 21, I've seen this pick floating around a lot. I have Zay Flowers going to the Chargers.
Yeah. For me, I really wanted to put Zay Flowers there, but as I was doing my draft, I kept putting this guy off farther and farther when he's an amazing offensive lineman. I have Peter Skoronski here. In this mock draft I have here, this is with the evaluation that teams are going to be scared about Peter Skoronski's size and his wingspan not being very NFL prototypical. But I think the Chargers need offensive line help so bad. You honestly move Skoronski into guard, and you have Rashawn Slater on the left side. That's a surefire offensive line for me.
And then at 22, I think this pick also is kind of locked in for me. I think if he's there, the Ravens are going to take Jackson Smith and Jigba.
I love that logic. For me, even though I like Zay Flowers maybe a little bit more, I think Smith and Jigba fits perfectly, and I have the same pick at 22.
And then at 23, I had this in my last mock draft. I think this is the perfect spot for him. Deontay Banks going to Minnesota.
Yeah, that's a really good pick. I had the Vikings filling out that defensive line. I don't really know what's going to happen there. I'm thinking they might change up their defense quite a bit going into next year, but I have Brian Brzee.
I like that pick. I know he's fallen, I would say a good amount because he was like a top 10, even top 5 pick kind of to start. But I think he went 20 in my board, but I think he's still a good player. But we just
I
see
think
other people jump.
Yeah, I think he's a really good prospect. I mean, he had a really poor end to his season at Clemson. A lot of stuff that off the field stuff that he couldn't control and that went super poorly, not in his favor. But, I think he's going to bounce back from that. And if he gets to Minnesota, I think he's going to be a day one really impactful player on the defensive side.
At 24, I have a guy who wasn't even in my mock draft last time. I have the Jaguars taking Emmanuel Forbes. I think he's a big riser for me. And the Jaguars are kind of in a spot where I don't know if they really take a wide receiver at this point. I think they can wait a little bit. And I don't know if they really love any of the offensive line at this point either.
I think that Emmanuel Forbes pick is on the money. For me, I went with a guy who could shore up the nickel corner spot and also obviously play some safety. I had Brian Branch out of Alabama.
And then at 25, we have the Giants. I want to hear your pick first.
All right, so I got to go first because Banning's the Giants fan. Probably my favorite receiver on the board is still here for the Giants. Last year, receiver was clearly in need. Kenny Galladay's already out. I was gonna say on the way out. He's been out. I think you got to attack receiver with a totally different type of guy. My guy Zay Flowers is still here. I think it's a great pick for the Giants.
Yeah, I like that pick a lot. He went earlier in my board, and in my draft right now, I already have 4 receivers gone. So I was in a really tough spot at this point. Also because I hyper analyzed this pick because in my mind, like I'm picking the guy. So
Yeah.
this is a really tough spot for me because there's a lot of good guys on the board. And in my mock draft, we haven't had Bijan Robinson be drafted yet. So if they lose Saquon, I would love that replacement. But in my mind right now, Saquon is kind of still there. So I ended up taking them. I ended up having the Giants take Darnell Washington, which is a big pick. It was between him or Michael Mayer, and I think they kind of take the risk. I'm not a huge fan of Michael Mayer overall. I think he's a good player, but I don't really see a difference between him and Daniel Bellinger. But the difference between Darnell Washington and Daniel Bellinger, if you put them on different sides, I think it'll be great. And I think that would definitely help Daniel Jones out a lot because he's going to be a safety receiver because you can just throw to him. He'll get like 8 yards every catch. And then you can just turn it into like Phillip Rivers bailing out and throwing to Antonio Gates. And I think we could see a situation like that. I don't know if this will happen, but the way that my mock worked, I think I would really like this pick.
Yeah, I mean, Washington over Mayer is going to be a big talking point when this goes live. But with that being said, I think you took the better fit. And if you're willing to bank on Washington being an NFL, doesn't even have to be a stud, but an NFL starting level tight end, you picked a better scheme fit. I don't hate that pick.
Yeah. And he wouldn't be tight end 1 in this scenario too,
Yeah.
which I don't think that's bad for him. So then at 26, we have the Cowboys. I have them taking Cam Smith here. Originally, I think the Bijan Robinson fit was really well, but since they tagged Pollard, it's still kind of up in the air right now. So I don't see them taking Bijan.
Yeah. I mean, Cam Smith is my guy. Out of all the prospects in this draft that I gassed up, he might be the one I gassed up the most. Him and Gonzalez are those 2 corners I really love. With that being said, this is where my second trade comes. I think the Cowboys are always one of those teams that you don't really know what they're going to draft. They usually just seem to take best player available. But I really couldn't give you many needs that they need right at 26. So I have them trading down, and I have the Cardinals moving back up into the first round. There's a lot of movement for the Cardinals in this mock draft. I had them trading down earlier. I think they trade up here to get Bijan Robinson. They have a lot of weird stuff going on at the running back position. I know James Conner is good, but if you asked me, I think he's deceiving good. I think he's fantasy good. You can get any guy that can bust out 5-yard touchdowns. Bijan Robinson will come in and be a top 10 running back. Give it a year. I think that makes the Cardinals so much more dynamic. And if you're not going to get an lineman in the first round this year, you got to get Kyler Murray weapons before DeAndre Hopkins heads out. So I have the Cardinals trading back up to get Bijan. I think it would be crazy, and I would love it.
I really like that. I've seen a lot of people talk about the Cardinals trading up in different spots to get him, and especially if he falls. Speaking of another guy that I think he's a really good prospect, but position-wise, I don't really know where to put him on this board. And Brian Branch falls to 27 here to the Bills. I think the Bills just can't pass up on him. And I think he's way better than the 27th best player in this class. But just like Bijan Robinson, position-wise, teams don't really need safety as much as they need cornerback in this draft.
Yeah. For 27 for me, I remember last draft you had Steve Avila from TCU in this spot, basically with the idea that the Bills just need offensive line. Here I have my guy, Anton Harrison. I think he's really solid. I know he's more of an outside guy, but I think you can shift around the offensive line accordingly. I think he'd be a great pick for the Bills here.
Speaking of Harrison, I have him going to the Bengals here at 28. They need a tackle, and I think that would be a perfect fit for them.
Yeah, same logic here. I think in my mock draft, the Bengals are pretty mad that Harrison just went. But a guy that just had a big combine, and I think we'll have a really solid pro day. DeJuan Jones at Ohio State is on the board. So I have him going there at 28.
And then at 29, we have the Saints. I have them taking Myles Murphy here. Yep. I think it's a good fit for them on the edge.
Yeah, I think it's a great fit. And if he falls to that spot, I think the Saints are going to be super happy. You talked about him earlier. I won't go too in depth. My guy Cam Smith is still on the board. I think the Saints could use him.
And then at 30, I have the Eagles with their second pick of the draft. They got a cornerback at 10. So I think they're going to go on the opposite side. They're going to take Josh Downs here and kind of fill that Quez Watkins role. And I love Josh Downs as a prospect too. And I think he is, I don't know if he's first round talent, but I think he's on the edge. So I don't think it's that much of a reach.
I think we're really on the same page with this mock. For all the same reasons you just said, I'm going to give the Eagles a super quick and twitchy receiver, but I'm going to go with my hometown as a stretch. I'm going to go with my favorite college team guy, Jalen Hyatt.
And then the 31st overall pick, I have the Chiefs trading this pick to the Bills, who move up into the first round and take Bijan Robinson. At this point, I saw the Chiefs and what was left. I didn't really think that they needed too much at this point, and I think they could definitely move past this pick. If they somehow were just like, oh, we'll take Bijan Robinson here, that'd be insane. But I think the Bills would definitely pay to take that pick. And I couldn't have Bijan falling out of the first round.
Yeah. For me, I'm gonna admit my faults here. I let this guy slide way too far in my mock because I'm really hot on him. I have Nolan Smith here. I think the Chiefs attacked edge last year with George Karlaftis. I don't think you can get enough edge, especially fast edge players in the NFL these days. So Nolan Smith still being on the board, auto pick for me.
So I think did you have a Steelers pick? I didn't have a pick for them.
I did have a Steelers pick. I won't go too crazy if you didn't have one, but just at my 32 spot, I had Drew Sanders at Arkansas. I just want to talk about him a little bit. I really like Jack Campbell out of Iowa, who I was talking about earlier. Drew Sanders is one of the only guys I see in this draft that could play inside and outside linebacker. He's like, he'd be one of the three in a 3-4 scheme, but he can really rush the passer. I think the Steelers, and I'm blanking on the dude's name, Robert Spillane that they had last year or the year before. He's like Robert Spillane on crack. Like, I think he would fill that role perfectly. So I just want to throw that out there.
All right. Pretty different, I would say, from our first drafts, which was only 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, but we were pretty close in this one. I think
position wise, it kind of just came down to like big board preference.
Yeah. And this is what happens when we get closer. I mean, once free agency news comes around and we really understand where teams are going, I think we're going to end up having mock drafts that look very, very similar. But you can see week by week we're getting closer. So
I think as the draft comes up too, we do always end up seeing like the first, the second, third pick kind of locked in. But kind of like I was saying earlier, like I think if the Ravens, if Jackson Smith and Jigba's there, I think they're taking him 100 out of 100 times. I think sometimes we
Right.
end up seeing like later first round picks kind of locked in.
Yeah. I mean, that's how it was. And maybe not a later first round pick, but by the time the draft came around, I might have been in denial, but we knew if Mac Jones was around at pick 16 for the Patriots, they were going to take him. And they took him. It was simple.
So I guess we'll just bounce over to the rest of the NFL. Right when we started recording, we got news that Lamar Jackson was officially franchise tagged non-exclusively, which means that he will most likely, if a team wants to pay him, will go somewhere else at this point. That means that he won't be traded. So it looks like the Ravens might just lose him overall because a team's going to pay for Lamar Jackson. So kind of just hearing this, your first reactions to this.
Yeah. So, I mean, as you guys are watching this is going to be old news, but for us, this is brand new. This is within like the last 10 minutes. My opinions are, I'm confused, I guess. I don't think it was necessarily like a head scratching move, but I'm confused on what this means for Lamar because other news that we've got around the same time is that Atlanta's not looking to go for him. And Atlanta was kind of one of those spots that everyone was projecting him to go to. So for me, I'm really only looking at three options here. I think, honestly, I still think he's going to stick with the Ravens. It might be the stupid restricted free agency sort of thing just for the year, but I'd be really surprised if not. With that being said, this really opens doors for Jets fans and Raiders fans. And, you can say what you will about some of those other teams that might look quarterback like the Panthers. The Panthers don't have enough to give, if I can be honest with you. So, especially if I'm a Raiders fan, I'm like licking my chops right now. But I'd like to hear what you have to say about it because I don't even think I have a full constructive concept of it.
Well, I think with the Jets, it's kind of weird because we also, I guess we can just talk about it now too. The idea of Aaron Rodgers going there.
Yeah.
They just put in yesterday, so they're going to be able to talk to him. And it kind of looks like if he doesn't go there, it doesn't look like he's going to leave. It kind of looks like he's either going to be on the Packers or the Jets. So I'm not really surprised by that. I think this move, I had them getting Derek Carr just because I didn't think that Aaron Rodgers was going to go there. But now that Derek Carr is gone, and it looks like they didn't even try to get Derek Carr. So without them trying to get Derek Carr, I think they kind of banked on the idea of Aaron Rodgers. So I think if they can get Aaron Rodgers with that young receiving core in a kind of interesting division, because the Patriots, I don't think are going to be that good next year. The Bills, we don't know how good they're going to be. They could be good in the regular season like they always are, but when the playoffs come around, we don't know what's going to happen. And the Jets are a young team too, and they have good pieces. So it kind of comes down to if they could get Lamar or Aaron Rodgers, I think both of us would agree you got to get Lamar. But if you can't get Lamar and you end up with Aaron Rodgers, that's not a bad consolation prize.
Yeah. I mean, to touch on this, I was talking last episode about Derek Carr going to the Saints for the scheme fit. Wow, I did not think it would be this bad. I said in the episode, I'm not a huge Derek Carr supporter, but he's a better option than Andy Dalton or Jameis, and I stick with that. But a 4-year deal is ridiculous. I mean, to me, this is a guy that you realistically start for 2-3 years max. And, there's going to be some people that really disagree with me, but I'm not taking 4 years of Derek Carr in any division of football. You can't just bank on your quarterback to be good because you play in a bad division. Like, what happens when you get to the playoffs? You just get smacked. Me personally, I really think they should have tried to get a smaller deal on this. Clearly, Derek Carr had some leverage, so shouts out to that. And then the Aaron Rodgers case, I mean, I'm all for it. I think Aaron Rodgers should be a Jet. The only thing I worry about if I'm the Jets is I look at Russell Wilson last year. Obviously, we're talking about two different levels of quarterbacks, but the idea, elite quarterback for a big chunk of your future to compete in the division that has been tough on you for the last couple of years. Didn't work for the Broncos. Maybe it works this year, but if I'm the Jets looking at that, I might be getting nervous. Might be saying, "Hey, we got to put all the cards for Lamar Jackson because we don't want to be the 2022 Broncos." So that's just something that I've been thinking about. With that being said, like you said, if Aaron Rodgers is a consolation prize, you're playing the best game ever. So
Yeah.
I think it's interesting.
I mean, overall, I think I'm not too mad with the Derek Carr 4-year deal, looking that Geno Smith got 3 years. I would take 4 years of Derek Carr over 3 years of Geno Smith, in my opinion.
I totally disagree, and this is where we go different because
Yeah.
I think a big thing about NFL quarterbacks is the direction you're trending. Obviously, that can flip on a head. We saw it last year. Geno Smith was trending down, totally goes up. I'm gonna take a guy that's trending up over a guy that's trending down like Derek Carr, and I'd especially take it for a year less. So that might be something we can discuss in depth or further at another time and get all angry about. But I was impressed with the Seahawks for not having to pay Geno Smith as much as I thought they would, more than anything.
Yeah. I mean, still basically 30 million a year, 105 for 3 years. I know,
Yeah,
I think 150 over 4 years is kind of a lot for Derek Carr,
yeah,
but I mean, Daniel Jones is going to get 45 million. So all three of these guys are going to get locked up. But I'm taking Daniel Jones though. I mean, if you're paying, this makes me feel better about that as a Giants fan, because
yeah,
if Derek Carr is getting that much from a team that is probably not going to win a playoff game, but just to win the division, just because they're in a terrible division, I will take Daniel Jones to make $45 million a year.
yeah. And I'm back to agreeing with you. I think that's a great point.
So I mean, kind of moving away from the quarterback talk, we saw a few franchise tag players. We saw Josh Jacobs and Tony Pollard both getting franchise tagged. We can talk about this a little bit. Franchise tags, they're kind of weird to talk about just because sometimes they're exclusive, sometimes teams try to match it. So we don't really know until it's like completely official if they're going to stay or not. But I kind of expected both of these guys to be free agents. More Tony Pollard than Josh Jacobs. I could have seen Josh Jacobs staying. But for both of these teams, I think it's okay if they do stay. Obviously, Josh Jacobs had a great year last year. I'm not going to go out and say he's the best running back in the league, like I've seen some people say. I do think he's a good running back, and he does have some good upside, just like a guy like Tony Pollard. But I think
Yeah,
overall, these guys do deserve to get paid. So I hope they do get a payday.
yeah. And for me, I mean, Josh Jacobs, like you were saying, I expected him to be with the Raiders, whether it was a franchise tag or not. Tony Pollard gives me a little more interest because to me, this is the Cowboys committing that Tony Pollard is going to be your next stud running back. And I think it's a moving on from Zeke move. Obviously, Zeke is still going to have a huge impact this year and for however much longer he's on the team. But with that being said, the fact that you're willing to pay Tony Pollard top running back money makes it seem to me at least that they're going to figure out a deal to keep him on the squad, which I think is a good move. I like Tony Pollard a lot.
Yeah. Well, they're going to have two running backs making top running back money. So
Yeah.
we'll
Yeah.
see
It's
what
going to be
ends up
tough.
happening with that, especially in a division where a lot of the players are young.
Yeah.
Like the Eagles aren't going to have to pay for a while. The Giants are kind of just getting to that spot where they're paying to. And I mean, we don't have to talk about the Commanders. They're not really a football team at this point.
Yeah. Just to talk about the other two franchise tags with the Commanders in mind, we have Daron Payne, who, despite me not being able to pronounce his first name, I think he's one of the most underrated defensive linemen in football. I think you've got to pay him top money right now, which is tough because you have to pay your whole D line top money pretty soon. So that's going to be another issue for the Commanders. And then we have your boy Evan Engram, who was a Giants blunder, but had a really good season in Jacksonville. I think him getting the franchise tag just reflects more on the tight end market than his play. I think he played well, but I don't see him being a Jaguar after this season.
Yeah. Obviously he had a good turnaround season, but tight ends are not really at a premium right now.
Yeah.
So kind of moving on to the last point in the NFL, we have a potential Jalen Ramsey trade. And it came out today as we're recording that they're kind of looking for a first round pick or like a really high second and something else.
Yeah.
So I'm personally a big Jalen Ramsey fan. And I know he's been scrutinized the past few years just because he gets burned in one game and then he just locks up for the next few games. But he's one of those guys where people only care when he does bad. I still think he's a really good player. I don't know how I feel about him getting a first round pick though in return, especially at cornerback when it seems like every single draft we have like 3 or 4 cornerbacks getting drafted in the first round. And then we also end up having like an all pro cornerback on day 2 in pretty much every draft at this point.
Yeah.
So I'll kind of bounce it over to you. I don't really know how I feel about. I think he should get traded. I don't think the situation in Los Angeles is good for him at this point, but I don't know how I feel about a first round pick.
Yeah, I mean, we might be the only sports podcast on the internet with two Jalen Ramsey supporters. I'm a big fan of his as well. And I don't think the Rams are going to get a first round pick. I think they're asking for it because they've traded so many. It's almost like they want to be reciprocated for it, but that's not necessarily how things work in the NFL. I mean, for me, I'd like to see Jalen Ramsey move on to a different team. I still think the Rams are in a spot next year where they can compete. So I don't necessarily think, they should be happy about moving on from him, but I think it might be the right move for both parties. I'm not going to read through all my notes here. I'm not going to bore you. Everyone knows how good Jalen Ramsey is. But I think a couple teams to look out for are the Raiders and the Bengals. If the Raiders don't hit on a guy like Lamar Jackson, they have all that cap space that they currently have. Why not shore up the defense? Actually build a secondary. For the Bengals, I mean, it would just be ridiculous. They are in that 1 year left where they don't have to pay Joe Burrow. So they do have the cap space for it. I know it's going to screw you up next year, but they might pull a 2021 Rams, trade for one of the best defensive players in the league, and make the Super Bowl run right now. And I would be a fan of that move. I think it would be fun too. Why not? Let's see something crazy.
I think kind of an outsider team we could see too is the Eagles. They definitely
Yeah.
need a cornerback. And they're in the same scenario where they kind of have one more year before they have to pay most of their guys. So they could make a push there if they decide they'd rather have him than a guy like Joey Porter in the draft. Because then with that 10th pick, I mean, they may not trade that 10th pick, obviously, for Jalen Ramsey. I think that would be insane. But if you trade that 30th pick,
Yeah.
the first round to get Jalen Ramsey, I don't think that would be terrible. Even though I don't like the Eagles and I like Jalen Ramsey, I mean, that would be a good spot for them.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we have a good amount for the NBA, but I kind of want to just wrap up the UFC right now, kind of just get it out of the way.
Yeah.
This weekend, we talked about it on the podcast last week going into this week, and we made some predictions, but most of my predictions, besides the Bo Nickel one, ended up being wrong. The John Jones one completely shocked me, and also with the Alexa Grasso winning the title. I mean, we'll talk about John Jones quickly. Absolutely dominant in his first performance at heavyweight. 3 years off, coming in fighting the top heavyweight is absolutely insane. I did not think that was going to end that quickly. I thought it was going to go to decision, and I thought that Gane had a chance to even knock him out just because we haven't seen Jones at heavyweight. But pretty much 2-minute submission just absolutely took him over. And I mean, a lot of people had him as the GOAT before this. I think everything is completely shut down after this. He's the greatest MMA fighter of all time. And if he didn't have his out of the cage issues, I mean, I don't know how much more he could have done at this point, but for a guy to be the best in his sport and also be off for 3 years, be suspended for a year and a half, have his title stripped is just insane to think about how good he really could have been, even though he's already the best ever.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I'm not a guy that's been into MMA for a long time. So I really have to do my research when I come in, I guess is my point, to really be knowledgeable. And when I do my research, I don't have this bias because I haven't watched a lot of these guys in the past. And I've only seen certain, clips and fights from certain people. So if we're talking on paper, which, we hate on paper around here, I can't see how John Jones wouldn't be the GOAT. And, that might be me being ignorant or me being biased. But I mean, after the fight against Gane as well, I mean, it just solidified it for me at least. So that's my 2 cents on that.
So his next fight, it's pretty much locked in at this point. He only took one significant strike throughout the whole fight, and it was in the first 30 seconds when he got kicked in the balls, and then he was fine. But he's going to be fighting in July against Stipe Miocic, who is seen as the greatest heavyweight of all time. He's already opened at like minus 300. So John Jones, I think he's going to take out Stipe really easily. Stipe was really good 5 years ago. He's the best UFC heavyweight probably ever. Just because we've seen so many guys come in and out of the heavyweight division. But I think John Jones is going to make easy work. And it's interesting after that because he said he wants to kind of have 2 more fights after this fight. So I don't know who he fights after that, just because we've seen the possibility of a Francis Ngannou fight. But since Francis just I don't know what his issue is. He doesn't want to sign with the UFC. So I think he's scared of John Jones, and John Jones even called him out for that too. So I don't know if we'll ever see that mega fight, but it'll be interesting to see after that. And then
Yeah.
the next thing to talk about is Valentina Shevchenko, who was seen as the best woman in her weight class, probably of all time, had the championship for I think almost 5 years at this point. I'm pretty sure she won in late 2018. And this just shows watching that whole fight, Grasso had some good strikes in the first 2 rounds, but in the UFC, you make one mistake and it's over. She went for a spinning kick, and Grasso got on her back and just choked her out for the win. And this was huge. I did not see this coming at all. I thought Shevchenko was going to win in the second round. I predicted that second round knockout. And after the second round, it even looked like she was just going to just make her way with her at some point because she looked like she was the better fighter. But Grasso, I think it's good for her to win just because to kind of see the new, it's always good to see late blooming UFC fighters. We see this all the time. There's people who get into their 30s who are kind of like on the brink of possibly out of their career or being a champion. And it was kind of Grasso's scenario here. If she lost, I don't think she would have got another title fight just because she's older. But we see late bloomers all the time. And I think it's always good to see a new champion. There will be immediate rematch just because Shevchenko was amazing with the title. So we'll see what happens then. I know you also watched this fight, so
Yeah, I mean, the way I was watching it, Shevchenko kind of seemed like she was going to hold on. Like after the first couple rounds, or the first round and a half specifically, I'm thinking, all right, she is so much better than Grasso. Like she's waiting to make that move to get Grasso out of here. But Grasso was just kind of holding on. So I'm like, all right, this is how this fight's going to go. We're going to see something late or we're going to see a decision, right? And then Shevchenko makes the move where I'm like, oh my God, this is where she gets her. Like this is the time. Grasso with a beautiful counter. And as you said, one mistake and it's wraps. Grasso got on her back and there was nothing from there. It was a total flip. It went from me being confident in Shevchenko to just over in seconds. And I think that's what's so beautiful about the UFC sometimes. And again, this coming from someone that's new, still learning, it seemed like I already knew what was going to happen. And then one move flipped on its head. So I would love to see a rematch between these two. And I think, as you know, I think that's another thing about the UFC that I'm really starting to appreciate is these late bloomers. You know, this was Grasso's, I'm not going to say only time to really shine at this level, but honestly could have been. And I think they both competed well, but I really want to see them run it back personally.
yeah. Another fight that we'll talk about, Bo Nickel. I had him winning in second round submission, but he went out there in the first round. I know a lot of people predicted the first round. I thought that it was going to take a little more time, but he just got it done easily. The best college wrestler of all time. And I think he's on this projection that we see a lot from highly anticipated UFC fighters, where, I mean, he's going to get a title fight within the next 2 years. Like it's pretty much written in stone and it's going to happen. But the problem with him is that if this goes to a striking battle, he could easily get knocked out by most of the top guys just because he has that wrestling background. And it's really easy to wrestle guys, but especially at his weight class, there's a lot of guys that he could get popped by. I do hope that he can win the championship, obviously someday. But if he gets pushed too fast, then it'll set him back a little bit. And we see this happen all the time with guys like Sean O'Malley currently, who got put into a fight against Peter Yan, and he beat him by decision. But now he's going to have a championship fight, and I don't know if I'm really confident in him winning that. But for now, Bo Nickel's in a spot where he's going to take a little harder fight next time, and then a little harder, and then make his way up. But as a Penn State alumni, I love to see Bo Nickel win. And
Not yet.
well, he is the alum.
Well, yeah, yeah.
I love to see a guy like him succeed. So hopefully he can just keep on this path.
Yeah, I thought the fight was electrifying. I mean, I'm waiting. Obviously, I think as most waiting to see how the career progresses. There's a lot to be said, a lot to be done, but damn, he just kicked ass. He really kicked ass.
So we do have a lot of big UFC events coming up this summer. So we'll talk a little bit about those more. Probably have our special guest Conor McPherson back at one point. I know Conor McGregor is going to fight this summer, and he's probably the biggest Conor McGregor fanboy that I know. So I'll have a lot to say about it. I'm taking Michael Chandler in that fight, so we might have a heated debate when that comes around. But for now, I think this event just topped off John Jones being greatest of all time. And I think there's no debates at all after this.
Yeah. No, I love that man, Conor McPherson. He should be on here every episode.
So next up we have the MLB, and just like we did last week, we did some predictions. So we'll go through this relatively quickly. We can talk about it a little bit. We're going to be doing the AL and the NL Central this week. So if you want to start, we'll just go through. I guess we can start with the AL just to make it easy, the AL Central.
Yeah, should I go bottom to top?
Whatever. We can go top to bottom if you want.
Yeah, why not? Why not? So for mine, I drifted a little more from the projections this time. I have the Guardians finishing in first at 91 and 71, hitting their over pretty easily. Next, I have the White Sox going 84 and 78, just hitting their over of 83.5. Third, I have the Twins going 81 and 81, which is under their 84.5. Fourth, I have the Royals going 70 and 94, which is over their 68.5. And in last place, I have the Tigers going 64 and 98, which is quite a bit under their 69.5.
Okay. So I agree with you. I have Cleveland going 90 and 72. So a good amount over. They're one of my favorite teams, especially in this division. Last year, they just had amazing hitters. Obviously, they have Ramirez, who is a perennial MVP candidate. So I think this team's going to be really good. And then after that, I have Minnesota going 88 and 74 above their total. A little different than yours, but I think they're going to exceed their expectations by a little bit. They got a little better in the offseason, so I think they'll be a little better than their projections. And then third, I have Chicago going 81 and 81. I don't think they're a great team. I think they're going to go under the 83.5 projection. And I think they're going to struggle with some injuries, but in a tight division, especially with them and Minnesota, I could see it going either way. I just have a little more faith in Minnesota at this point. And then I have Kansas City at fourth going 69 and 93. So I have them going over by a game. And then I have Detroit going 67 and 95 going under by a game. I think both of those teams aren't that great. I don't really have much to say about them. But they're going to be at the bottom of the division, and I don't really see them winning that many games.
Yeah, and I mean, the biggest thing for me is the Guardians are probably the best team in this division. So it really becomes a tight race between the White Sox and the Twins, and then a tight race between the Royals and the Tigers. For me, I had the White Sox and the Royals coming out on top. You have the Twins and the Royals. Could really go either way. I mean, these teams play each other so often. Those games are going to really start to count up as we get towards the end of the season. Then to kick it over to the NL Central, I have the Cardinals finishing first at 92 and 70, hitting their over of 88.5. I think it's a really good team. Second, I have the Brewers going 85 and 77, which is under their 86.5. Third, I have the Cubs going 81 and 81, which is over their 76.5 by a decent amount. Fourth, I have the Pirates going 68 and 94, which is over their 97.5. Then last, I have the Reds going 63 and 99, which is under their 65.5.
All right. I think ours are pretty similar. To start off, I have St. Louis going 87 and 75. I'm a little skeptical of this team. I know they're good, but I don't know. At the end of the day, I'm not really too sold on them. I think they're going to be good, but I have them going 2 games under. I think it's going to be a little more competitive in the division than it's kind of made out to be. I have Milwaukee going 84 and 78, also going under. I have them at second. And then I have Chicago going 80 and 82, going over. So all those teams pretty close. I mean, Chicago's in third within 7 games of St. Louis. I think it's going to be, like I said, a little closer than people make it out to be. I don't think any of these teams are really much better than each other. I think St. Louis, obviously on paper, is a lot better, but like we always say, we don't really know what's going to happen until it happens. And then basically like the AL Central. We have the two bottom teams. I have Cincinnati going 68 and 94, going a little bit over. And then I have Pittsburgh going under their 67 and a half total with 64 wins and 98 losses. I don't think either one of these teams are that great. I think Cincinnati's a little better. Pittsburgh's a little younger. I know they have O'Neal Cruz. They have some good prospects over there, but both of these teams are kind of just feeding into their feeder systems right now. So maybe if you give them a few years, they'll be better. But the Reds have kind of been on this track of trying to get back to where they were, and they just haven't really got much better.
Yeah, I mean, for me, one, I look at these teams that, we don't really expect to perform well. And what sets them apart for me is like, all right, we know they're probably not going to win 70 games. They're not going to be very good. Who has the most random star power, I would say? I could probably think of a better term for that. But I see a guy like O'Neal Cruz on the Pirates, and I'm like, all right, this team still sucks. But can they beat out the Reds in the division because they have one dude that can pop balls? Yeah, why not? So I think we're really close on these predictions. Again, we've kind of been locked in this episode for the most part, but I think we're seeing similar stuff out of the AL and NL Central.
All right. Bouncing it out of the MLB, kind of before we go back into the NBA, I just want to talk about some breaking news. Daniel Jones just signed his 4-year contract for $160 million. So we can talk about this live as it just happened. So at this point, it looks like he's going to be making $40 million a year if I can do the math right.
Yeah.
Oh, a little under the 45 million. I know it'll probably change a little bit. He'll probably get, it's never like exactly the same every single year. So we'll probably get more guaranteed money. But for about 40 million a year, I can't be too mad at that. I know we talked about it earlier. Derek Carr getting a lot of money, Geno Smith getting a lot of money, and Daniel Jones got better last season. And if they surround him with some talent, I'll be happy with this. We don't know how Saquon Barkley's going to, we don't know what's going to happen with him at this point, if he gets franchise tagged or not. But Daniel Jones just kind of beat the franchise tag clock. He wasn't going to get tagged. We knew he was going to get signed. It was just for how much. So I think right now I'm happy with 40 million a year. I don't think that's too bad. I know he's going to be close to the Mahomes money, and people are going to be like, oh, he's not as good as Mahomes. But I mean, he's going to be the franchise quarterback for now, for the foreseeable future. And I know you kind of said it, I think it was last week, maybe 2 weeks ago. He might end up in that Kirk Cousins era where he's good, but he's not great. But if there's guys surrounded around him, then they can be a good playoff team. And I think that's how it's going to go. I don't think he's going to develop into the superstar, all-star quarterback. But if he's good enough, and maybe even just he has a few years where he's even better than good enough, kind of like Eli Manning's career, where Eli was never this elite top 5 quarterback, but he had some seasons where he cracked like probably the 10th or the 9th best. I think that's fine. I'm not saying Daniel Jones will be as good as Eli, but I think this is okay for now. I'm not too mad at this.
Yeah, I think this is just what the quarterback market dictates now. Like, yes, if we're going to be honest, Daniel Jones is not worth $40-ish million a year. We both know that. But the problem is, it's a better decision to do that than do something else at quarterback if you're the Giants. Like, you don't really have other options. You would, if you lose him, you have to roll with random years of bridge quarterbacks until you're bad enough to draft a good one. That's the point we're at. And if you're the Giants and you're currently building a roster that for the first time in maybe 5-6 years is genuinely going to be really good, you need a quarterback there. You're not getting Mahomes, you're not getting prime Brady, you're not getting these stud quarterbacks, but you're getting a guy that can win you football games with the right roster around him. And that's honestly, with the quarterback talent where we're at right now, that's better than most of the league. So yeah, it's a lot of money, but if that's what it takes to solidify a guy that can win you playoff football games like he did last year, I think you have to do it. And I don't dislike the deal. I think it's fair.
Yeah, I mean, their only really other option was kind of roll with a guy like Teddy Bridgewater or Tyrod Taylor for a year.
No.
But you can't really do that when you're a team that will probably make the playoffs again, even if they're the 7th seed. I think they're going to make the playoffs again next year.
Well, when you start doing that, you don't stop until you win a Super Bowl with a horrible quarterback, which in NFL history has happened like 5 times ever, or you get bad enough again where you get to draft a good quarterback. And
Yeah.
if I'm the Giants, why would I want either of those options? Your roster's not good enough to win a quarterback with Bridgewater or Brissett or something, and your roster's not bad enough to tank. You know, I think sure you might have got Kirk Cousins 2.0, but I'd rather have Kirk Cousins than 3 years of quarterbacks that shouldn't be starting, 4 years of quarterbacks that shouldn't be starting. You get the idea.
Yeah. I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens because I think Jones is going to get better. I don't think he's going to get that much better, but he did really well in Brian Daboll's system. So I'm excited for the future. And he's there for 4 years. He can leave after that fourth year, and then Arch Manning will come in and the Giants win 10 Super Bowls. So everything is going to
Yeah,
work out in the end.
sounds good. All
And
right.
Arch
Well,
Manning in 10 years will probably get $90 million a year just because the quarterback market will
yeah,
be insane.
probably. And this year he might not even start over Quinn Ewers. Uh, to kick it over to the NBA, we have a lot of points here. I think we should try to speed run through it a little bit. But I want to ask you the first question. It seems like you're always out here asking me the questions. I want to switch back to you. Are the Knicks back? We've seen a lot of success recently. What do you make of that? Because that's a question that's been going around a lot.
I mean, they're 12-2 in the past 14 games. They're on a 9-game winning streak. They just knocked off the Celtics, I think twice, right? Within the week.
Yeah.
They knocked off the Celtics. They've put some good wins together. Jalen Brunson is playing amazing. I think me including, I think a lot of people just forgot how young he is. And he's in NBA wise, I think if you're 26 years old, I think that's how old he is right now. I may be
Yeah.
wrong by a year.
No,
But
26.
yeah, if he's 26 and then he gets good, some people say he's a late bloomer. But I mean, he's still young, in my opinion. But it's just because we see guys who are 19 get drafted and they get good right away, like Palo. But I think this team's going to be good. I could definitely see them making a push. I know we talked about it a while ago towards one of the first episodes because they're right about to make that run. And I don't know if they're going to win the East per se and go to the finals. I don't really see that happening. But if they just beat the Celtics twice, then I think they could definitely make some noise. Maybe they could make a Hawks run to that Eastern Conference Finals that we saw a few years ago, kind of like the Hawks did.
I'm going to get on my hater shit real quick. And with that being said, I love the point you made about Jalen Brunson. I think somehow he's still underrated, even though we all know he's good. He was Luka's sidekick for the whole beginning of Luka's career and then comes to New York and is the guy. So I love Jalen Brunson. With that being said, no, the Knicks are not back. And I know I sound like a hater because they beat my favorite team 2 games in a row. And I'm not even going to comment on that because they played really well against the Celtics and the Celtics lost. That's not really what I'm worried about. What I'm worried about is this is exactly, maybe not to this degree, but what we saw in 2020, not 2020, whatever year they lost to the Hawks. That might have been 2021 now. I'm losing track of the years. But they came in, and I don't know if you remember how crazy the vibe was around New York around then. People were saying the Knicks are going to the finals just to get rocked by Trae Young in the first round. Trae Young, who isn't that good. Trae Young, who wasn't an all-star, and I don't care what they say on NBA TikTok, should not have been an all-star this year. And that is the guy that single-handedly took out your team after getting all this hype behind you. And as someone who currently lives in the New York area, it's really fun around here when the Knicks are good. It's a completely different vibe. I swear the weather gets better. With that being said, this team is too young. This team is poorly coached. I don't care how good the Knicks are because Jalen Brunson and Randall are carrying right now. Tom Thibodeau is still a horrible coach. They're not a real threat. They're going to go against a team pretty early. Like I'm predicting Cleveland. Cleveland could beat the brakes off them. I would take Cleveland in 5, Cleveland in 4. I'm taking a team with 5 legit starters that can go out there and run it every game with a really good head coach and a solid bench over a team like the Knicks, who logistically, besides Brunson and Randall, and I think Robinson's been having a really good underrated stretch. Like they're plug and play guys around that team, and I'm really sounding like a hater right now. I don't think the Knicks are bad per se, but they have first round exit written all over them for me. And I feel like people like to gas them up just because they're historic. And it is good for the NBA when the Knicks, the Celtics are both good. But the Knicks are a first round exit. I don't care. The Knicks could win out the rest of the season, get a 2 seed, and they're still a first round exit to me. That's just my, I guess, hot take on the situation.
That is a hot take in my opinion. I don't know if they're losing in the first round. I think they're better way better than that team. They're already record-wise better than that team that lost to the Hawks. And I think
Yeah,
get a favorable matchup. I do think that Cleveland matchup would be tough if they end up with that. But I think they'll probably end up against, depending on what we'll see in the East. We don't really know right now, but I,
I
I
don't
don't
think
know if they'll lose in the first round.
Banning. I don't think they're getting a more favorable matchup than that because logistically, I think they finish up around the fourth seed, which would put them against Cleveland. If they're the fifth seed, that's probably also Cleveland. Any lower than that, assuming I think the Knicks are going to sustain playing well, but they probably aren't going to stay on this mega run. You get Philly, Boston, Milwaukee. You pray for Cleveland at that point, and I think Cleveland beats them in 5. So I don't know. I think if the Knicks are playing in the West, I'm talking a different story. I think the Knicks are good enough to win a playoff series, but based on who they got to go up against, I don't like any of the matchups, not a single one. So I'm gonna take the Knicks as a first round exit up until they show me something else, I guess.
So I guess speaking on that, we just talked about the Knicks beating the Celtics. Celtics have kind of been on a skid recently. I think we can both agree on that. The Bucks have officially passed them in the standings. Do you think the Bucks are the favorite in the East now, or do you think it's just kind of a skid and you
I'm gonna
shouldn't be?
stick with Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna stick with my bias a little bit since I've already acknowledged it like 400 times. I think the Celtics are still the favorites in the East. I think as we've seen in the skid, they are not unbeatable. But just my comments on some of the recent games, I feel like the games that the Celtics have lost have not been because of Tatum's poor performance. Excuse me. I think we've seen really great performances from other teams, which you could view it in a way where that's a crack in the Celtics defense. Personally, I just see it in guys knowing they're going to play one of the best teams in the league and showing out, and that's just bound to happen at some points. In the game against the Knicks, where the Celtics lost in overtime, Tatum put up a 40 burger. He played really well, or around that. I might be wrong. I don't have the stats in front of me. All I remember is Tatum had an amazing game. And then the Celtics go to overtime last night with the Cavs, and they're missing Jason Tatum, and the rest of the team still brings them to an overtime game, which Grant Williams sold. And that's just how it goes sometimes. I'm not worried about the playoffs with them. I think the Celtics, the Celtics are a team that made the finals last year, and I think they got better. So it makes me confident that they're still the favorite. Now, Milwaukee really scares me. The one thing that doesn't scare me about Milwaukee is they still haven't figured out how much to play Chris Middleton. Some games, it's like the whole thing that the Clippers are doing. Sometimes Chris Middleton will play like 35 minutes, and other times he'll play 12. And this isn't like blowouts where he's playing 12. They can't really figure out how much he's playing. And, there's random Chris Middleton slander sometimes, but he's still one of the best. He's still an all-star caliber player, even though that's not really where he's at right now. So I think if the Bucks can figure out the Middleton thing, sure, you can put them as the favorites. But for now, I'm still going to take the Celtics. I know Tatum sold against the Warriors last year, had a really poor finals. But besides that, he had a really good playoff run. I think he's a playoff-made player. And I really think he's going to show out if he makes the finals this year. Obviously, we're a long way away. But I'm going to swing it back to you because I just rambled on a little bit. Are the Celtics your favorite in the East, or are you putting teams like Milwaukee or Philly up there now?
I think, like you said, I really like that statement. I was going to bring it up. I don't think the Celtics are kind of unbeatable. Before this, I had them making the East and making the finals pretty easily. I didn't really think there was anyone that could really challenge them. I'd like to say that Philly could. They've had a lot of close games. I mean, half a second away from going to overtime with Embiid. And all the games have been Philly had the lead too. They should have won that game. But Doc Rivers really loves to blow leads. He's probably the best coach of all time at doing that. And sometimes you got to be the best at something. So at least he's the best at that. We'll see what happens in the next game. If Philly can beat them, then I'd feel a little confident in a 7-game series. I don't think they get swept by Boston in a 7-game series. If they did, I would be completely surprised, especially if they play in Philly too. I don't think they're getting swept. But I don't know if they really compete with them too much. I could see it being like a 6-game series. I expect the Celtics to beat them. I'm not really sold on the Bucks. I'm not a huge Giannis fan. We'll talk about him a little bit later with his stat paddings. We'll talk about that later. I got a lot to say. I don't know how I feel about that team. They're really good some nights. They're really bad some nights. They almost lost to the Celtics. They went to overtime against the Celtics bum squad, which I don't know what happened with the Celtics. 2 weeks ago, we were talking about how they almost beat most of the top teams, and they beat some top teams with Blake Griffin playing almost like 25 minutes. And now they're losing. And we'll talk about it in the next point, but I still think the Celtics are the best team. And that next point I want to talk about, they put Jason Tatum at third in the MVP ladder. And this is just absolutely ridiculous. Jason Tatum has not had a better year than Joel Embiid. And I'm going to stand up here and say that Joel Embiid is averaging 33 points a game, and the team is third in the East and only, I think right now, 5 games out of the first seed. And he is putting up an amazing year, amazing stats, and he gets knocked out of the top 3 for absolutely no reason. Jason Tatum is shooting 41% in the last 10 games. He is chucking up shots like Kobe did. And I'm not surprised by that because he loves to do everything that Kobe did. Jason Tatum is not better than Joel Embiid this year. And I think that's absolutely ridiculous. Giannis, I can see that. Giannis is an amazing defensive player. And I mean, between him and Embiid, I think they're some of the best defensive players in the league. I don't think Embiid gets as much credit defensively as Giannis just because he doesn't put up as much stats, but obviously he's an elite rim protector. We saw that against the Grizzlies when Ja tried to dunk on him. We'll talk about Ja later too. We got a lot to talk about, but I think it's absolutely ridiculous. And Tatum got caught with that MVP curse that we've seen this year. And we've seen that happen with a lot of guys this year. We also saw the All-Star curse too, which happened with Drew Holiday, who absolutely sucked after that. But I think that Jason Tatum, having him as third on the MVP list is absolutely terrible. And I still think they're a good team. I don't think he's a terrible player. I would have him as fourth, but to have him over Embiid is absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, and we're gonna pretty much move on to the next point here because simply I agree. You know, I'm a big Tatum fan, favorite player, favorite team, whatever. But Embiid is, I think you can. This is the same deal we got into last year. You can only really argue 3 guys at MVP, which are Jokic, Embiid, and Giannis. And the NBA.com writers move random people up for clicks, and that's just how it is. And you know, I think
they got us talking about it.
Yeah, they got us. We're yelling on the podcast. They started writing about the Knicks. I started screaming. They write about Embiid. They got you. With that being said, I don't look too deeply into this stuff because when we get to the end of the season, the ladder is going to be exactly what we know it is. Right now, if they don't move stuff, there's no post for the NBA page and there's no clicks on the website. So they're just moving stuff around right now, in my opinion. Embiid has clearly had a better season than Tatum. You know, team record matters and that stuff, but not enough to even make an argument there. So I think we should cut it up to the next thing. And on here, I mean, Ja Morant, it feels tough to even know where to start, but you know, we don't need to deep dive. Maybe we will, but right now we don't need to deep dive into all the off the court stuff that he's been getting into. You know, some serious stuff that's really going to bring the Grizzlies season off the rails, especially considering they're a starter on their team or 6-man, Brandon Clark, just tore his ACL out for the year. So, I mean, with that being said, the train is going off the rails, but are the Grizzlies still fine in the West? That's what we want to know.
I mean, the Grizzlies haven't been fine in the West at all. They're not even fine in the East. So I don't understand what Ja Morant. I mean, his off the court stuff. Something came out a few hours ago. I don't know if you saw it or not, but he's facing a 50-game suspension right now, which is if they find out if he actually had the gun on his team plane or not, which I don't know how else he would have got it there. But if it was automatic 50-game suspension from the NBA, and he's already got a few game suspension, which will probably be more from the team. Yeah. So we were talking about this the other night. I remember I set the over under on how many games he would play for the rest of the year at 0.5, and I took the under. I didn't think this was going to happen. So 50 games, obviously he's done for the season plus the playoffs. And I mean, they're losing
next season. Those carry over.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if you go on the internet, you're going to see a lot of jokes about Gilbert Arenas, but this is genuinely Gilbert Arenas. Yes, he didn't threaten a teammate, but he brought a gun on a team airplane and threatened somebody random. You know, especially with, this isn't what this podcast is about, but especially with how gun violence is today, it's just disgusting. And the fact that it was a minor doesn't help the case. When it comes to Ja's character, I'm not going to speak on it. I don't know him personally, but I haven't ever seen really good things. So, but if we're going to talk about strictly basketball, they're not fine in the West, and I'm with you. They were never fine in the West. I'm a big Nuggets supporter. I think they're the best team in the league right now, which that can be my hot take for the video if you want. Probably not, but I think currently they play the best basketball in the league. And I'm just gonna look at my notes here. Excuse my eyes averting the camera. Don't sleep on the Kings being legit. The Suns are unbeatable on paper. We hate on paper, but we always have to mention it. The Warriors are getting Steph back at the best time, and I haven't even mentioned the Mavs or the Clippers. If I can be honest with you, I'm taking all those teams above the Grizzlies. I might have taken all those teams above the Grizzlies before we even knew any of this Jaw stuff. They are not fine in the West. You know, if the Grizzlies lose Ja for an extended period of time, their whole trajectory changes. I'll say you can say a lot about Ja as a person. You can say a lot about Ja's actions, and I'm not going to stop you. But Ja as a player is top 10. And this is absolutely ridiculous. Not only is it unfortunate for anyone involved in this stupid behavior, Ja's friends and family, you know, people that have been in these situations that Ja was acting poorly in, it's really unfortunate for the Grizzlies. This brings them from NBA Finals threat to like not even worth watching in a blink of an eye. So I guess that's my 2 cents on that.
Especially in the West, that first round matchup, they could end up playing the Clippers in the first round, depending on how
Yeah.
seeding works. And they're going to get smoked by the Clippers. I don't care if they have Ja or not. I'm taking
Yeah.
Kawhi and PG over Ja Morant and Dylan Brooks and Desmond Bane, who I mean, this Grizzlies team, I might just be saying this for myself. They had, before this Ja stuff, I hated this team overall. I don't like
Oh yeah.
Dylan Brooks. He's one of my most hated players in the league. I think he's like Pat Bev, but just not good. He talks a lot and then he gets smoked every time. He was trying to fight Niang the other night, and then they just win.
Yeah.
Niang makes a 3 in his face, and then he gets all mad about it. I don't
Yeah.
like this team at all. And even though I don't like this team, I'll stay biased too. I don't think they're a threat at all. I think they're a second round exit if they make it past the first round. I don't see them making it past the second round, even if they squeak out of the first round.
Yeah. Hey, and before either of us get too angry, I'm going to switch the topic to something that you're probably still angry about that I don't care about. So I would love to hear your opinions. We alluded to it earlier. Giannis in a game, I believe as we're recording last night, was a rebound away from getting a triple double.
Mhm.
And last play of the game, he goes and walks on the court and purposely misses a shot to get a rebound. And at the time, they awarded him the triple double. Now they took it back. And it was probably, we watched a lot of Westbrook back in the day. We've watched, some Embiid and Jokic moments, but we've never seen anything as stat padding ish as this. Yeah, me personally, I don't really care. So that's why I really want to hear your opinion on this.
I mean, I'm not a huge Westbrook fan overall. Over his career, he hasn't been my favorite player. I don't really have an opinion on him too much, but for Giannis the only criticism that we heard from this whole scenario is that people were mad at the NBA for taking the rebound away is insane to me. Because if Westbrook did this, and I'm not even a Westbrook fan, I would say, if he did this, then people would freak out. People think Westbrook gets slept on all time. He averaged a triple double over 3 seasons. And he just if he did this in a game this blatantly where he throws the ball off the backboard, everyone kind of just laughs about this because Giannis did it. I think it's just insane. If Embiid did this too, absolutely scrutinized in the media. I mean, he'd probably be on hate pages right now. Oh yeah, this is why he shouldn't be the MVP. He already gets hated on because he goes to the free throw line too much. And you know who's also goes to the free throw line as much as Embiid does? Do you know who it is?
There's 2 great answers that are both gonna be angry, but yeah.
Yeah, Giannis. He goes to the free throw line as much as Embiid does, but it's okay that Giannis does it. And I don't want to hate on Giannis too much. I don't hate him as a player. I would say I'm not a huge fan of him, but it's kind of like Westbrook. I respect him. I don't hate him as a player. I think if anyone else did this too, it just seems like Giannis gets protected a lot by the league. Not even the league itself, just like kind of the fans, which is kind of weird because the Bucks were hated a lot years ago, and Giannis was probably one of the most hated players at one point, I would say, just because I don't know why. People change so much in this NBA like space. Twitter changes so much on players. So I'm not too mad at Giannis specifically. I don't have a huge problem with that. I think I just have more of a problem with the way that people reacted to it, just because if it was pretty much any other player, people would have been mad about it.
Yeah, I mean, so for people that may not know us outside of the podcast, Manning's like my best friend. So I'm gonna take his side. I'm gonna have his back on this one. I love Giannis. He's genuinely one of my favorite players to watch. I've always, always been a fan of his. But once again, I don't really care. But to piggyback off Manning's point, if this was Embiid, people would have freaked out. I think this whole situation says more about Embiid than it does about Giannis, because I mean, just and even guys like Westbrook too. I think it just shows that the things that people on NBA Twitter claim they care about, they don't. They just want to hate. You know, if Embiid or Westbrook or anyone else that is seen negatively on NBA Twitter did this, it would have been a huge issue. We would have seen it everywhere. And as you said, it would have been on hate pages. But Giannis does it. And I found myself doing this too. I just kind of laugh. I don't really mind. So I think, sure, if you had to ask me straight up, yes or no, do I think Giannis did something stupid? I'm going to say yes. But I think it reflects more on the unnecessary hate we give random players sometimes. And, it comes in waves. I remember this might be 3 or 2 years ago now when Jason Tatum got a 90 in 2K, a little before he probably should have. People were losing it. Everyone hated Jason Tatum. Then he starts playing really amazing. Everyone loves Jason Tatum. Then he starts getting a little too Kobe obsessed. People hate Jason Tatum again. And this is the thing. Embiid, when he first came to the NBA, people loved him. People loved the process. I, as a Celtics fan, had trust the process in my Instagram bio. I had a Joel Embiid shirt. I hate the Sixers. And then ever since the Sixers actually started winning some games, they had the Ben Simmons thing going on. Tobias Harris came to the squad. People hate Embiid. I think it's just interesting. I know I've drifted from the point quite a bit here, but it's just funny to me how this sort of thing amplifies the crazy biases that media has in the NBA. And I think it's well known, it's not talked about enough. So that's my little rant right there.
I mean, all I gotta say, keep the same energy and
Keep the
carry
same
on.
energy.
As Kendrick Perkins says, my favorite NBA analyst, him and Jalen Rose. I love them. JJ
I hate
Redick.
Kendrick Perkins.
Oh
I
yeah,
hate Kendrick Perkins.
I was joking about that. I don't
Yeah,
like Kendrick.
yeah.
And like
Oh, I know you don't either. I'm
guys,
just gonna make it clear.
JJ Redick called him out today too, so I'm glad to see that. That was
JJ Redick.
we don't have to talk about that. That was
Yeah. I hope JJ Redick doesn't get switched up, because right now he's one of the only real ones we got. So
yeah. And he called out Kendrick Perkins today for race baiting. So
yeah, I mean, we're not going to talk about that in this podcast, but just another reason we got to, there's a lot of good reporters still left out there, and we got to rock with them. I'll rock with JJ Redick. I rock with Michael Feinbaum. Forgetting the name. There's one I really like that maybe I'll reference another episode when I remember, but plenty of great reporters. I even like, I know we're drifting like crazy, but Kenny the Jet Smith, he's really good. He says some real stuff a lot, and I think people laugh just because he's on the show with Shaq and Chuck, and they take a lot of the attention away. And even Ernie is more popular than him at this point. I really like Kenny. I think he says some.
I just think he's kind of washed out, like you said.
Yeah, but if you actually listen to him, he might be the most intelligent one on there.
Yeah, and there's a reason why he's at all the college basketball games too.
Yeah.
Pretty much all the other guys aren't.
Exactly.
So on to the next thing, we have the Clippers sliding. I wanted to talk about this a little bit specifically. I've watched most of their games recently, and I've kind of had a hyper focus on them just because I had them in my finals prediction. I wasn't too locked in with them just because the West is so wide open. But recently, they just haven't really been able to win games. And I've noticed it's just kind of because Westbrook is there, not because of him. They just haven't been able to figure out the rotations yet. They played a game where he was playing great. I think he had like 15 points through 3 quarters, which at this point of his career is really good, especially for a guy who's not, I mean, he's the pretty much the third or fourth scoring option right now, behind PG and Kawhi, and then just didn't play the fourth quarter at all. And I
Yeah,
just don't really understand what's going on over there. They're pretty much turning into the Sixers of the East, where they have good talent. They just can't get it done. And I honestly think it's just like the Sixers. The coach is the main reason why I don't think they're doing that well right now. I think they're going to turn it around, though. I'm not too confident in them to make the finals right now. I really don't know how I feel in the West. And that could just be me being a Nuggets hater, but I do see some holes in them. I don't think the West is like, I don't think the Nuggets are locked in right now. I do think that they're still one of the like top 3 at least, maybe even the best team in the NBA. But I just think that every single team in the West has a hole, and even like this is probably the most open that we've seen the West in a while, in my opinion,
yeah,
because the Warriors without Steph for a while. I know they just got him back the other night, but we're going into the playoff push and they're games behind. So we'll see what happens. I mean, the Kings are still young. So I just wanted to talk about that a little bit. I think they'll figure it out, but we'll see what happens.
yeah. And I mean, when it comes to that, and I don't really want to defend Ty Lue. I don't think he's a great coach. But I think we might have underrated how tough it was to change your starting point guard more than halfway through the season. It sounds so obvious, but when it's an improvement, I think we just all assume, oh, yeah, it's going to go great. Because Westbrook is better than John Wall right now. Pick any time in their careers, like whatever. But it's a completely different type of point guard. Where we were in John Wall's point of his career is that he was a former athletic point guard who had to transition to being a passing guard, which it wasn't working amazing for the Clippers, but it was a style at least. Westbrook, uh, even though I think he's definitely an improvement over John Wall, he's a little more sporadic. And the really good parts of that is he can do a lot of different things for your team. The bad part of that is you don't know what you're getting night to night. So you don't really know in which situations Russell Westbrook should always be on the floor. So I think the Clippers are uber talented. I really wanted to include that word in there today. I think they're really, really talented, but you're running almost a completely different game now. And I don't think Ty Lue is necessarily the best coach to be making big adjustments or rotational decisions like this. I think it's just put them in a tough space. So if they do figure it out, that's your finals prediction could still stand, but it's going to take a lot more work than I think you or I was really like considering when we were talking about them last.
Yeah. I mean, we've seen this a little bit too. Even Draymond pointed out the other night, they're not guarding Westbrook at the 3-point line. And the thing about him is either he's hot or he's not. And when he's not and he keeps shooting, it can get really bad. So I mean, we'll have to see what happens with this. So one more thing in the NBA that we'll talk about quickly is the Suns. I think they just the other night, I would say, first game where they really started getting it clicking. And this team has been really good. So I kind of want to just hear what you have to say about this real quick to end it.
Yeah, I mean, just to keep it simple for the end, they're dangerous. I mean, I'm going to reference it one more time in the episode. On paper, they're the best team in the league. And I think we're seeing it first and foremost. I think the only thing they lack is wing depth, but that's even a stretch as I really like guys like Damian Lee. I like TJ Warren off the bench, Torrey Craig. He's not always healthy. I don't know what his deal is sometimes, but they have wings that can really play basketball. And then at the front of that, you have newly acquired Kevin Durant. I think that's a really tough team. I don't love all of their performances. I think, as you said, they're still working on clicking. They've been looking a lot better recently. But that Mavericks game didn't show a whole lot to me. I think that just looked like KD taking control and all the other dudes playing background, which it's going to take more than that to win the finals this year. Usually that would be enough, but this year I would argue it's not. So, I'm still waiting on it a little. I want to hear what you have to say about this, but I'm giving it a little more time before I really tell you if the Suns are going to make the finals this year or not.
I mean, Devin Booker still did drop 36 in that game. So I wouldn't
Oh,
say
yeah.
in the background. I
No,
don't like
yeah,
Devin Booker at all. And I think it was great to see Luka and him getting into it because I love that rivalry. It's kind of one of those unexpected rivalries that we didn't really think we would get. But just because so much has happened now, it just blossomed into one. It's one of those things that we'll see for a few years and then it'll fade off. Like that Cavs Warriors just became such a historic rivalry just because they played so much. But I think overall this team is really good. And we'll just have to see what happens. Like every single team in the West, the playoffs is going to be huge. And it's just who steps up the most in the end.
yeah. And as you just mentioned, Booker was not in the background that game, so I should probably word myself a little bit better. I just think with when you get a player like KD and he's so new, dudes are gonna become background characters at some point, and I'm worried about that. And this is a concept we hear all the time in the NBA. We heard it with like originally like LeBron, D Wade, and Bosh. Like these guys are all studs. Who's going to be willing to not have the ball in their hands more? And I think KD has proven that he's really good at that. But late game situation, I get nervous if Booker is still trying to be that guy. And I don't want to sound like a Booker hater, but I think when you get Kevin Durant on a team, you're going to have to start running the team through him to find ultimate success. And I want to see if the Suns are able to do that successfully. But
Yeah.
as you mentioned, I really like that Mavs Suns rivalry. I think Booker's a really great player, so we'll see. It's definitely possible.
I mean, I'd love to see the Mavs sweep them just because
Yeah,
I love the idea of the Mavs beating the Suns. I still think the Chris Paul makes the three to take it down to a 42-point lead is probably one of the best NBA memes that we've seen in a while.
it's awesome.
And Luka is probably going to end up being my favorite player in the league after LeBron retires. I've been a big Luka fan for a while, and I want to see them succeed. And I really would love to see this as maybe not a Western Conference Finals matchup, depending on how the seeding works. But even if it's a second round matchup, I'd love to see this. I want to see this in the playoffs for a 7-game series,
Yeah,
just because there's so much animosity and star power. And like you kind of said, I don't think Chris Paul is going to take the last shot. I think we kind of both agree on that. So it's just going to be like Devin Booker or Kevin Durant. And I think it's the same thing with the Mavs. Is it going to be Kyrie or is it going to be Luka? So both of these teams are kind of in the same scenario right now, where they kind of have two really good late closers, but we'll just have to end up seeing who takes the final shot. And I think what we can wish for is a 7-game series that goes to 7 games, and we see all 4 of these guys take game-winning shots.
yeah. I mean, that would be awesome.
It's not going to happen.
Oh, of course not, but it would be awesome.
But so I think that's really it. This is kind of a long episode, but I think we got to talk about a lot of good points going into this week. There's a lot that happened. I think we kind of made more than there really was, which is good because I think we got a lot of good out of this episode. And I think overall, we appreciate all the support that we see from Instagram and YouTube and everything. And that's kind of why we do this, is just to see the engagement too. It's good to see, but we're going to do this either way. But the engagement is even better to see too.
Yeah, and we really appreciate the support on Instagram. That's kind of like my little specialty, so I really enjoy doing it. I have some banger posts coming. I send them to Banning over and over again because I'm really liking what I have going forward. So, I mean, this week, look forward to the AL Central and NL Central picks we talked about. We have some big board NFL draft general stuff that I'm really excited about that I've been working on. So, if you're watching right now, especially look out for it. I'm generally really excited. I think we just banged out another good episode. So, we're gonna keep it coming, I guess.
Yeah. So with that all in mind, we'll see you guys next week.
Thank you.